Welcome to the Produce on Purpose podcast, where we experience life being the real you. Today we have a wonderful guest, and he has done quite a bit. He's an author. He's a multifaceted individual who has dedicated his career to helping others discover and fulfill their life's purpose. As the host of Inspired Stewardship podcast, Scott shares valuable insights on personal growth, leadership, and effective stewardship of their time, talent, and treasures. Scott, it's so wonderful to have you on, and I just excited about having you on to this Produce on Purpose podcast. How are you today?
I am doing fantastic. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, so I'm just excited to be able to talk a little bit about your journey and kind of how you've gotten to where you are. I know you have extensive experience as a coach and have done some great things on your journey. So if you would like, if you could give everyone a good feel of how your journey began and how you ended up where you are at this moment.
Sure, I can kind of go back in time a little bit and kind of catch people up. So back in the day, I actually went to college with the idea of I was going to go into medical research. I wanted to become an MD and then PhD and kind of do medical research. I have a couple of undergraduate degrees in sciences. I started doing research work, was thinking about going back to graduate school, and kind of figured out that really doing medical research was more about chasing grant money than it was about doing research. And the whole reason I wanted to do the research was to help people. So that was always kind of something that I've had as a driving force in my life, is trying to help other people. So I pivoted and went into kind of the family business, which was school teacher. My mother had been a teacher. My father had been a teacher. He was in business by the time I was going to college, but he'd started his careers as a teacher. And so I knew I could do that. So I kind of pivoted into school teaching, did school teaching for 16 years. I taught pretty much every science that they offer in middle school and high school in the state of Texas, except earth science. I don't do rocks. I can do anything else.
No geology.
No geology. Weak on meteorology, but the other stuff I'm pretty good at. So did it for 16 years. Loved teaching. Enjoyed pouring into the kids. I was always kind of not the teacher that just stood up at the front of the room and said, "Okay, let me lecture for an hour and then do the questions at the back of the book." We for one thing, I taught science, so that's a little bit more active kind of teaching anyway. But I was always a real Socratic teacher who kind of engaged with the kids in that way and did a lot of questioning and probing and getting them to think and produce and do things, weird things, things that weren't necessarily typical to the classroom. Eventually, I kind of burned out on teaching. Anyone who's been around teachers knows that that's a pretty thankless job. You don't get paid a lot. You work really long hours. It's emotionally draining. There's a lot of stuff that you have to do that isn't the fun stuff, like teaching the kids. It's, all the paperwork and the busy work and all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I pivoted. I left teaching. I kind of went and did a few other things for a little while I was trying to kind of figure out what did I want my next phase of my life to look like. And I was invited by a friend of mine to apply for a job for a company called Educational Testing Service.
Mm-hmm.
So I left teaching and I went to writing tests for a living. In the words of my students, I joined the dark side, Truth was, though, it was really even there, the testing that I was developing, I was always working on it with the idea of, these are ways of actually, believe it or not, testing is a way that actually helps kids and helps classrooms and helps schools. I always joke and say that the testing part is good. What the politicians do with it isn't always so great. But, the testing part serves a purpose.
Right.
And so I was doing that. I kind of worked myself up in that company, spent 11 years with them, worked myself up into a senior position. In the meantime, on the personal side, my wife and I had gotten married. We'd had a child. We'd gone through a really difficult time in our own life and our own finances and kind of that. We nearly divorced because of finances. I was suicidal because of finances. And we kind of turned that around and began and had decided, we're going to get out of this mess and we're going to do it together. And we kind of worked together to turn our life around financially. So by the time I'm kind of getting to the end of my career, I also was starting to get asked by people, "Hey, can you help me with, my money? Because y'all figured it out, come help me." And so I'd started doing coaching on the side, figured out, wait a minute, this really hits all of those different pieces of my calling that I've been trying to hit. When I was in corporate, I loved pouring into the leaders. When I was teaching, I loved pouring into the kids. Hey, coaching is another way I can do that. And so
Right.
I started a coaching business on the side, then reversed my climb from the corporate ladder. I
Hmm.
literally trained my own replacement. I gave them a year's notice, worked my way out of my position, and then launched the coaching business full time in 2017. And that's what we've been doing ever since.
Oh, this is so awesome. I'm so excited about this conversation because a lot of it aligns with a lot of what I like to talk about. And when we talk about producing in life and making sure we have a purpose, a calling, sounds like through and navigating your journey, you ended up with a call that you kind of saw threaded throughout all of your experiences, whether it was teaching or in business or now as a
Hmm.
coach that you're able to kind of jump into and look at. So I want to start with that question of, what do you define as your calling? And, how do you feel that that is impactful for everyone to really know about and, implement in their lives?
Sure. So, first off, I want to distinguish between two different things because I think a lot of times we get calling and kind of our career or the roles that we play or the jobs that we have, and we kind of conflate those two. And they are related, but they're not the same thing.
Hmm.
So, as an example, my calling, my deeper purpose is that idea of helping to develop other people into what they're supposed to be doing. Anytime I'm able to do that, I'm able to pour into other people in a way that helps move them along on their journey.
Hmm.
That brings me joy. That brings me happiness, that, emotional joy, physical joy, everything, right? It just lights up the fuses in my brain. And I'm like, ding, ding, ding. I am doing what I am supposed to be doing. This is my purpose.
Yes.
But notice my assignment, my career, I've been a school teacher. I've worked in the corporate world. I'm now a coach. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a godparent. All of these different roles or assignments that I have
Hmm.
are places where I can play that calling out.
Yes.
They're not the calling though. The
Right.
calling is the purpose behind it. And I think that's important to recognize because I think it throws people off sometimes where they think, oh, I'm doing XYZ, so now I'm fulfilling my calling. I'm not fulfilling my calling because I'm a coach. I'm
Right.
fulfilling my calling through coaching, if that
Yes.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like different expressions of that same calling or purpose, and you're able to, as you're on your journey, to be able to start seeing that work out as you go through the process and being able to identify that. So, how do you make sure you identify that particular call that you have in your life versus the expression or the role that you might be playing? Because I know I've kind of gotten in that space before where I'm starting to identify with my job instead of really identifying with that call that I have in my life. How
Mhm.
do I begin to distinguish that?
That is hard. And it is, I think it's something like you said that we always run into periods where we can kind of fall into that and start thinking of that way. I don't think that's unusual at all. And part of it is stepping back another layer. It has to do with intentionality. It has to do with actually spending the time and energy to stop and think, to put some white space in your life. I think so often we're so busy doing, running from this thing to this thing to this thing, got to drop the kids, got to go to work, got to do this, got to do the dishes, got to do the laundry, got to, that we never stop to think and go, wait, how am I fulfilling, my purpose through what I'm doing? How am I being in my doing? Because, we're human beings, not human doings, but yet we all have to do. So it is that tension that we have between running from thing to thing, just being busy, and what
Right.
I call, being productive, which is no, it's not doing a lot, it's just doing the right things. And one of the right things is spending the time to be introspective, to actually think about it, to ask yourself, what do I want to be when I grow up? What is this next phase of my life going to look like? And so a couple of activities that I've used with folks, and I'll share them with your listeners. These are things you can do on your own. You
Hmm.
can do it with a coach. You can do it with somebody else. One is what I call a looking backwards activity. This works a little better for those of us that have a little bit of gray hair. It'll work for anyone, but it's a
Yeah.
little easier if you got a little bit more gray hair. So what you do is you sit down and literally just start brainstorming everything you've done, all of the roles, all of the assignments. This isn't just about jobs. This can be
Mm-hmm.
volunteer. This could be being a father. This could be being whatever, right? All of the
Right.
stuff that you do. Just write that down in a column. Then in the next column, write, what do I love about it? And just begin to, what do I love about being a husband? What do I love about being a father? What do I
Mm-hmm.
love about my current job? What do I love about the job I had 10 years ago? What do I love about that thing I did in high school? Whatever it is, okay? Be as broad and expansive as you can and write as much as you can. This is about producing information.
Right.
And then in the last column on the piece of paper, write, what did I hate about it? What did I dislike about it? What did I not enjoy about it? However you want to phrase that, however strong you want to be about it.
Yeah.
And then just begin to brainstorm all of the negatives. And what you're going to do is after you produce all of this information, begin to kind of go through and look for patterns. What keeps showing up in the love column? What keeps showing up in the hate column? And it begins to give you a direction towards, hey, wait a minute, no matter what role I'm fulfilling, here's the deeper stuff. Here's the stuff that keeps showing up. Here's the stuff that keeps bringing me joy. Here's the stuff that keeps giving me energy. So the other activity is a looking forward activity.
Mm-hmm.
This works for anyone again. So
Yeah.
here's the scenario. So again, when I was in corporate, I used to travel all the time. So I set this scenario in an airport because I'm very familiar with airports. So that's why it's there.
Yeah.
So imagine for a minute, it's 5 years in the future and you're flying home you've been on a trip, you've been away from home for about a week and you're flying home, you've got a connection. So you stopped at that connecting airport, you get out of the plane, you run to the other gate where the plane's supposed to be leaving. Sure enough, those dreaded words, flight delayed. Oh, great.
Yes.
Now you're stuck in an airport. You're not at home yet. You're not even where you left from. You're in that airport in between, and you've got like 4 hours before the plane's going to leave. So you
Right.
do what anyone does at an airport when they're stuck there for 3 or 4 hours. You go find either a bar or a restaurant, depending on your particular preference, right? For me,
Mm-hmm.
it'd be a restaurant. So I go and find a restaurant, find a bite to eat. I find a quiet corner so I can just kind of hang out for a little while until it's closer to my flight. Remember, this is 5 years in the future. And as
Yeah.
you walk into the restaurant, you happen to look over and you see a friend who you haven't seen for 5 years. They were a good friend, but they moved away. Y'all have lost contact. You really haven't kept up. And they look at you, they're like, hey, Randy, great to see you. Awesome. How are you doing? You hear long and you're like, well, I've got a layover. Turns out they've got a layover too. You go
Yeah.
grab a quiet table together in the corner. Your friend looks at you and says, man, how have the last 5 years been treating you?
Right.
And you answer, this has been the best 5 years of my life because.
That's
Now,
nice.
the activity is ... What comes after the word because?
Yes.
What's true about your relationships? What's true about your career? What's true about everything?
Mm-hmm.
Your finances, your time, what's your life look like that would make you truly answer your friend, man, these next 5 years have been the best 5 years of my life. And so
Yes.
between those two activities, what you can do is start to see bubbling up what's your actual purpose as opposed to what role am I playing today?
I like that. And so you've taken the time, you've done the research, you've done some retrospective on yourself, and then you go in and you start to the intentionality word that you brought up earlier was really cool. You start to bring up intentionality of what you are
Where do I want to
looking
go?
to do and where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a fantastic way to be able to get to your calling, get to your purpose, and start to think about that. So I have looked at your book. So you have a book called Inspired Living, and you also talk about putting the puzzle together. So I want to have an idea of what are those major puzzle pieces, and then I do have some specific questions because I've heard of some little pieces throughout the book that I've looked at, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it'll be great as we started talking about calling of how maybe some of those puzzle pieces can help us find that purpose within our lives and actually live that inspired life that you talk about.
Sure. So when I use that analogy of the puzzle, and what's funny about it, right, is in some ways putting our life together is like putting together a puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Only sometimes the box cover changes, what the image is on the cover of the box, and sometimes there's pieces missing, and sometimes somebody throws some extra pieces in your box.
Right.
because our life is dynamic, right? So yeah, I don't know about you, but I've had some periods in my life where it's like somebody's adding pieces. I don't know who's doing it, but there's some extra stuff showing up, and it's not me.
Exactly.
And sometimes in a good way, sometimes not so great, but it happens. So, the idea is to sit down, and again, it's about that intentionality word that I used earlier, to start to identify for you what are the keystones. And, I run things through the lens of stewardship. So I think about things in terms of time, talent, and treasures.
Hmm.
So for me, there's a financial piece, there's a productivity piece, or time. How am I spending my time piece? And then, of course, the talent piece is more mindset and belief and communication and, those leadership, those sorts of soft skills is what they call them, even though I hate that word because they're really not soft, but they're more people oriented skills than they are numbers and things on a piece of paper skills.
Right.
So when you start thinking about those areas of your life, how am I spending my time? Am I doing the things that I really should be doing? Am I just busy and filling my calendar with stuff that really doesn't matter to me?
Hmm.
Same thing for money. Am I running through here and running and gunning and chasing money just for money's sake? And
Right.
what money do I have? How am I using that money, not just for me, but to further, others, to take care of others, to serve, that kind of thing. And if you think about it, Zig Ziglar talks about the wheel of life and as the 7 areas of life, spirituality or faith, and then as career, it has finances, as relationships, as kind of fun or recreational activity, all of these different components of your life.
Hmm.
You can think about it that way. The reason why I like just time, talent, and treasures is because, quite frankly, they show up in all those other areas.
Right.
If, for instance, if you're dealing with your money, if you're married and you're just trying to run your money and, you run your money and she runs her money, you probably got some communication things. You've got some stress things. It's going to affect other areas of your life.
Hmm.
Are y'all coming together and able to, even if you're keeping separate bank accounts, but are you in communication? Are you on the
Right.
same page? Do you have the same goals? So money touches all those areas of our life. Same thing for time. How we spend our time touches our health. It touches our wealth. It touches
Hmm.
our, all of the other areas. So kind of looking at those pieces, that's why those are the 3 that I talk about in the book.
Hmm.
It kind of lets us begin to frame the puzzle, put the edges together, so that then
Right.
we can fill in the middle.
So now I want to jump into some of the pieces that you have put in the book. And one of the areas that stood out to me was this thing you called the habit loop. And
Hmm.
you talk about how you can hack this habit loop. So explain the habit loop a little bit, and then also give us a key glimpse into how we can hack that habit loop that we sometimes run into.
Sure. So this is actually research that's done by a gentleman by the name of Charles Duhigg.
Hmm.
If you've read Atomic Habits by James Clear, he takes some of Charles's work and some other people's and kind of puts it together in that. Both, by the way, Charles Duhigg, his book is called The Power of Habit.
Yes.
James Clear, his is called Atomic Habits. They're both great books. So I would highly encourage reading those as well, especially if you want to go deeper in this. But
Right.
the broad outline is this. When it comes to habits, when it comes to the things we do, define a habit, the things we do without even really thinking about them, they just
Yeah.
happen as an almost natural response to something that happens. So the something that happens is called the cue. It's the thing that happens that triggers the habit. It could
Right.
be as simple as your alarm going off in the morning. And then the reaction or the response is sort of, what do we do in response to that? We hit the snooze button.
Right.
And then the third component is the reward. What happens that gives us that feeling of, dopamine hit in our brain, or that feeling of we've done something good. We get a reward of some sort. Could just be of the sweet flavor of the cookie. If your habit triggered you eat the cookie, whatever it is, you get some sort of mental, physical reward. That
Yeah.
is the loop. Cue, response, reward
Hmm.
goes back to cue. Because
Right.
what happens is those habit loops strengthen over time. The more you respond to the cue and get the reward, the more your brain goes, "Ooh, reward. Good, good. Do it again. Do it again." Your brain is basically a rat with it. If you've seen that experiment where they give the rat the button, and every time he hits the button, he gets food, and pretty soon the rat's just going button, 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 because he gets as much food as he wants.
Right.
Same thing for us, only it could be food, but sometimes it's not food, it's something else. By the way, your watch vibrates or your phone vibrates and tells you got a message. That's
Yes.
the cue. What
Right.
do? Immediately looked at the
Yep.
phone. That's the response. Oh, look, somebody sent me a message. That's the reward because it releases dopamine in your brain.
Yes.
So how do you hack that? Well, first off is you have to identify that pattern. You have to know what is the cue.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know what is my response. And you
Right.
kind of have to think about the reward too. And then you have to attack some part of that or parts of that. A lot of times the easiest one to attack is the cue, right? You can change the cue. My phone is on silent.
Yes.
My phone has a little app that I've installed that keeps notifications from coming through. I get to check those notifications 3 times a day.
Mm-hmm.
There are 5 people on this planet who can bypass that app.
Right.
Okay. Everyone else, you're going to voicemail, and I will call you back. Okay.
Yes.
I love you, but I don't love you that much. It's kind of one of those things because I need to be in control of my time. So I
Yes.
got rid of the cue of my phone going bzz, bzz, to get rid of that habit of checking my phone all the time.
Right.
Now, it could be a different habit. You could have that habit of doing something like, wanting to cut down on sweets. Okay, so what's the cue that causes you to eat the sweets? You also, by the way, could attack the routine. You could replace one response with a different one.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, every time I go to the break room, I grab a cookie. Okay, so what if you replace the response of grabbing a cookie with I grab some apple crisp?
Right. Yep.
Okay, something that's a little healthier for me.
Right.
So you can attack the cue, you can attack the response. The reward you can also attack
Mm-hmm.
by pivoting and trying to find something else that gives you a reward or a different reward or depriving yourself of the reward. Now, again,
Right.
depending on what the habit is and what the reward is and what the cue is and what the result, different ones are easier to attack for different habits. But
Yeah.
that's how you can begin to kind of dissect, break it down, and re-engineer what's triggering these habits.
Yeah, I found that to be very, very helpful to be able to say, we have these habits, and it's almost like these things that we are naturally doing
Mhm.
without even having to think about them. And that seemed to be a very good way of, you're talking about time, talent, and treasure. That a good hack for our time would be
Mhm.
to be able to try to attack some of these habit loops that we know are happening and going through and trying to identify those.
Yep.
And I like the idea of being able to break it up and say, hey, we're going to take a look at this and intentionally look at who I am. So we're starting with ourselves. And I know in the book you talk about ourselves, you talk about others, and then you kind of put it all together. So another question I ask about is you identified something called the keystone weaknesses. And so, what is a keystone weakness, and why should that be important to us as we are looking at trying to make ourselves better?
So, keystone habits and keystone weaknesses are kind of related to each other. So earlier when I was talking about money as an example, I was talking about the fact that attaches to every area of your life, right? It affects your relationships, it affects your career, it affects your health, it affects everything. That's the same thing happens. So what So when you think about a keystone habit, it's an area that if you get better in that thing, it then begins to get better in other areas. It improves them. Same thing. Now, if we reverse that and kind of look at it the other way, same thing happens from a weakness standpoint, meaning if there's a particular area in your life that you're not super strong at, well, shoring it up some, a lot of times, especially if they're keystone ones like time, money, these sorts of things that affect
Hmm.
all of the areas of your life,
Yeah.
it then begins to spill out and either drag things down or build
Right.
things up.
Okay.
Either way, right? If
Yep.
we improve, they go up. If we improve. Now, don't get me wrong. There's also this idea of working in our strengths versus working in our weaknesses. And I do actually agree that we need to work in areas that we're strong in. And, that tends to be the area where our calling and our purpose and these things show up. It tends to be in areas of strength.
Yes.
But that's different than saying we ignore our weaknesses.
Hmm.
So as an example, my son ain't very good at math.
Hmm.
He is never going to be called to be a CPA. He still needs to know how to balance his checkbook.
Right,
You
right.
know, he still has to have a modicum of math talent, that sort of thing. So you can identify the weaknesses, begin to shore them up to at least the level where they're no longer bringing down other areas, but then also identify the areas of strength and then use those to kind of multiply the other areas of your life.
And so then that gives you that full benefit of balancing that time and getting to a place where you are working within your calling.
Hmm.
In another area that I'm is dear to my heart is a lot of times we give our energy to different places, and you talk about our energy management and what that looks like. How
Hmm.
does that fit within us working with the time and then moving into a place of where we start to talk about our talents?
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, we think about, and I've used the expression brings me joy several times when I talk about my calling and those things that I'm supposed to be doing. I actually really, more often than not, I use the phrase brings me energy or gives me energy.
Right.
Because for me, at least, that's a measure of what I mean when I
Hmm.
say it brings me joy. So,
Yes.
as an example, there are calls that I get on with clients, and we have an hour-long call. I get off of that call, and it's like, man, bring me 5 more of those.
Yeah.
I am ready to go.
Yes.
There are other calls that I have with clients, and it's like, okay, I need a nap now.
Yes.
you know and it's not
Right.
necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just the energy of the interaction. Sometimes I'm pouring energy into my client,
Right.
and I've got to lift them up. Maybe there's a crisis going on in their life, there's something that they're working through that's really challenging, and I'm pouring energy into them. I get to the end of the hour and it's like, I need a nap. I am tapped.
Right.
And then there's other times where it's more like, no, they're firing on all cylinders, everything's going right. I'm still pouring energy into them, but that energy is also coming back to me and kind of multiplying and giving me even more energy. And that's the ones where I get off the call and I'm like, dude, yeah, let's do 5 more of these. This is awesome. Okay. By the way, those could be the exact same client, but 2 different points in time.
Yes.
So it's not a
Right.
person thing. It's an energy thing. So
Right.
that's why I tend to look at energy for things. So, like, for instance, with your time, when you're examining your time and you write down everything that you're doing during a day, go through
Yes.
it and begin to identify what are the tasks that give me energy? What
Yeah.
are the tasks that take energy away? I didn't say people, I said task. Though you can do it with people too, but that's a different conversation. Begin to work down that list and think about what is it that's giving me energy? What is it that's taken away from my energy? And now, don't get me wrong. There's a certain number of tasks that you have to do just because you're a human being and they got to get done and they don't give you energy. I
Right.
don't know very many people that go, woo, laundry. Yeah. It does not very often, right?
Right.
It tends to be that's just a task that you got to do because you don't want your clothes to stink, so at some point you got to wash them.
Right.
But there even still in the greater scheme of things, you can begin to identify the things that are pulling energy from you and giving you energy. You can do that in your time area. You can do that with money. You can do that with talent in terms
Hmm.
of the activities that are falling into those times. And that's another way, by the way, if you go back to, I gave you 2 activities earlier. This is another
Yeah.
one that can help you begin to bubble up. Where am I spending my time? Where am I spending my money? Are they the things that I should be doing? It's kind of a self check for, am I filling up my calendar with a bunch of stuff that probably
Yeah.
doesn't belong on my calendar?
Does it bring you energy? That's a
Yeah.
question you could ask yourself. Does this
Does
bring
it
me
bring me
energy?
energy? Hmm.
I love it. So I also wanted to dive a little bit into talent. So we talked a lot about time, and so you have a portion. You said there's a little secret about talent in the book, and you said you had a presenting problem or a presenting issue. And so if you want to kind of give us that little secret about talent that we may want to think about when we talk about that presenting problem or presenting issue that's there.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, and again, I taught myself a stewardship coach, work at Time, Talent, and Treasures.
Hmm.
And most of the time, people do not come to me and say, hey, I need help with talent. What they do is they come to me and they say, hey, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money to do whatever I'm supposed to be doing. And they present the problem on the surface as, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money. In a way, that's the symptom.
Yep.
That's not the real problem. The
Right.
the problem is usually deeper than that. And
Mm-hmm.
it usually involves things around our mindset. It involves things around limiting beliefs. It involves things about habits that we've built up over years. Sometimes habits that we had from childhood because we saw
Right.
mom and dad do something a certain way. Well, that must be the way you do it, right? And so you do it that way your entire life, and you never stop to think, is this the best way to do this?
Right.
So it's the problem that is presented is often not really the problem that's the real problem. So
Right.
as an example, I went in, I've gone to the doctor, boy, I have low energy. I've got this stuff going on. I think I need, some medicine or something to help me. Maybe I'm getting sick. I don't know what's going on. Oh yeah, we need to do a sleep test. I'm sleeping fine. It's like,
Right.
no, you're probably not. And so then they do the test. They find out, oh, I have sleep apnea.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. If I use a little machine at night, I'm not tired the next day. What do you know? So the real problem there was the sleep apnea. The symptom was the tiredness. Same thing
Right.
happens in our life around time and money. Generally, if you're struggling in those areas, I actually jokingly say I tell everyone I coach on time, talent, and treasures. I really only work on talent because at the end of the day, the way you handle your time, the way you
Mm-hmm.
handle your money, it's about how you handle yourself in your head and in your heart. And
Yeah.
so that's the secret. It is the real key by which all of those other habits, all of those other things that you're doing end up changing. That's the keystone habit in a way beyond everything else.
Yeah, I really do like that, and I love reading that portion of it because the presenting of a problem or an issue is sometimes just all we know. That's all we are experiencing. That's all we see at the moment. But if
Hmm.
we do take the time and analyze where we are, what's going on, what's happening, then we can finally get to potentially what the real issue is and then allow it where, because I might be saying I don't have enough time. Is that really the issue? That may not be the issue. It's just that maybe I was ending up in a particular place or position at the time. So I
Hmm.
also know that, hey, I won't give away any more of too much of the book, but you talk about something that I really love to talk about, and it's because I'm in software. And one of the things that we do in software is that we know that software, number one, is never finished. And then, secondly, as we're building software, we have found that humans are horrible at estimating. So I always tell my wife, I'm like, hey, see, when you're going to be home? Oh, I'm going to be home in 15 minutes. Really, when I know it's probably 25 minutes, I'm just bad at estimating. So one of the things that we've done in software to help with that is we have this thing called an agile process or
Hmm.
iterative process. And you talk about two areas, is both iteration and alignment. You don't have to give away everything, but I do believe it's a part of our life living. How does iteration really help us get to a place where we are maximizing our time, our talent, and our treasure, and our calling? And how does alignment fit within that?
Sure. So again, going back to the beginning of, I use the word intentional and it's going to show up again. Part of having an inspired life is having an intentional life. And the idea there is a life unexamined, you just kind of drift around and move from place to place and, whichever the way the wind blows you, that's the way you go. So what I propose instead is a cycle or framework or an iterative process of first you sit down and you make a plan. Write it down, budget your money, budget your time, plan your next set of activities, whatever it is. So you make a plan, then you execute on the plan. In other words, I said this is what I was going to get done today. Now I'm going to try to get that done today. And then you need to review, which means, did I get it done today? And you need to reflect yes or no and why. What was it
Right.
that happened that pulled me off task? What came up? What went wrong? What went right? What didn't work? Dissect it. So it's plan, execute, review and reflect, and then revise. Okay, what would I do different?
Yeah.
And then repeat, meaning
Yeah.
now you plan the next day, right? I'm going to do this tomorrow. And the idea is that you keep running these cycles And you could do that at a daily level. You do that at a weekly level. You could do that monthly, quarterly, annually, every 5 years. You can, it's like Russian dolls, right? One stacks inside of the other. You can keep scaling this up or scaling this down depending on what you're doing around your money, around your time, around other areas of your life, and begin to incrementally improve. The idea is a lot of times we try to make things change by just, knocking the ball out of the park, hitting the
Yeah.
home run, make
Hmm.
everything better today. Guess what? Almost never works.
Right.
So instead, I'm trying to come up with a way that you can just incrementally improve, and you get a little better and you get a little better and you get a little better and you get a little, and yeah, you're going to have days where you go backwards.
Hmm.
Okay. That's not the end of the world. And then you're going to have days where you go forwards. Okay. That's good. And the alignment comes in with, again, as part of that review and reflect kind of period, you're also thinking about, hey, not only did I get done what I was trying to get done today, but
Hmm.
were they the things that were the most important things? Were they the
Right.
things that actually were moving me the direction that I wanted to go? This is where, you can do this at a higher level and say, that 5-year thing that we did earlier, this is
Right.
where I want to be in 5 years. Okay, is this moving me that direction?
Yes.
Alternative question, is the things I'm doing today making tomorrow easier, or is it
Ah,
making it harder?
yes.
Okay, same thing with money. Is the way I'm spending my money today making my life easier tomorrow, or is it making it harder tomorrow? So one
Mm.
of the things I found is a lot of times the things that feel really good in the short term
Right.
cause long-term problems, and the things that are hard in the short term cause long-term rewards. So
Yes.
sometimes you got to suck it up, and do the thing that, you got to not eat the extra serving of ice cream. You got to push the back from the table. You got to do those things that they're not fun. They're not easy in the short term, but in the long term, go for that extra lap around the track, whatever it is,
Yeah.
and show up in your money, your time, and your health, or whatever area of your life, so that over the long term, life gets easier instead of getting harder. Because again, that incremental process, it always stacks upon itself. So if
Right.
you're adding things that are making life harder, it now gets harder to fix the fact. It
Yes.
stacks upon itself, and it's just going the wrong direction. If you're doing things that make your life a little easier over the long term, those stack as well.
That is actually very, very cool and awesome to be able to think about the that iterative process, the alignment, and really asking yourself some of those questions we talked about. Whether it was, what do you love? Is this giving me energy or not giving me energy? Is this actually making my life easier? I like the one about, is this making my life easier? I think everyone should think about that. What I'm doing right now, is that going to make it easier in the future in what I'm doing? And I believe that when we begin to frame everything in that way, then you do have a great alignment and you begin to produce on purpose. So at this moment, I'm going to ask you a question that I hopefully you'll enjoy, because now you get to say, all right, I know all of these things from my journey. I know all of this great information from my book. I want to give just 3 solid pieces of information for anyone to be able to take away. And you could either think of this of you talking back to yourself when you were just about to get out of high school. What would you tell yourself in that moment? Those 3 things that would be the most beneficial, as you feel now that you've learned through your life journey and you've written a book and you've got a podcast. What would you tell yourself?
So I think one of the first things I had to learn the hard way, but I wish I could have gone back and learned it, the easy way. I'm not sure if I would have believed myself if I told myself, but anyway, that if I'm honest, I, I think the wisdom, right, is wasted on the young because they don't listen sometimes. But when I look at things, the recognition that all of this stuff is a journey, not a destination. So I think so often like a lot of us, I've chased the destination. I've chased where I want to be. I want to be married. I want to do this. I want to live in this place, as opposed to enjoying and leaning back and saying, no, the journey is actually the important part. It's the, how do I get there? That's what matters, not getting there.
Right.
That would be one. The second thing that I think I would probably have to tell myself is, number one, you are worthy.
Mm-hmm.
I think for a lot of us, myself included, we have a limiting belief around ourselves, around our worthiness, around how somehow having to earn our worth. I have to prove to people I'm good enough. I have to prove to people that I'm worthy.
Hmm.
And just recognizing that no, I'm you don't have anything to prove to anybody. You're plenty good enough.
Yes.
That would be the second. And then the third is kind of along that area of, when you have these things that come up, focus only on the things that you actually have some control over.
Uh,
I think a lot of times I've gotten distracted. Again, I don't think I'm alone in this, with the stuff that there I want it to happen, or I want to make it not happen, but the truth is I have no direct control over it. The only people I can control is me.
yes.
It's not people plural, it's person, and it's me. Now sometimes I can control my response to something, or I can
Hmm.
control what I do, or I can control what I say. Sometimes I should probably do that more, but you know how that is, right? We can control ourselves. We can't control other people. We can't control other things. And so even now, like as a coach, I really try to push people to, look at your inputs, look at the things you have control over. Don't look at the outputs.
Right.
If you're a business person, I want 100 clients. Well, you can't really control that, but you can
Right.
control how often you're making calls. You can control how, other things that you are doing that you have control over that
Yes.
do result in clients. So it's
Right.
just that idea of focusing on the things that I have in my direct control.
I love that. And the focus on the journey, focus on our worth, and the focus on making sure that you're not focusing on things that are not in your control. Well, Scott, it has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I feel like we should continue to talk, but I think we're going to end it here. I'm going to ask you, where can people find you and connect with you and let us know more about what you're doing?
Absolutely. So I actually put together a page just for your listeners. So if you
Okay.
go over to my website, which is inspiredstewardship.com, and then put in /produce, I actually have a landing page there. It's got some free resources. So some of those activities that we were talking about, as well as some other ones, you can get those there for free, have direct access to them. There's a place on there where you could find out more about the book, Inspired Living, my podcast, all of those sorts of things as well, if you're interested. Also a place if you want to have a chat sometime. I've got a place that you can set up a time and jump on my calendar, and I'd be more than happy to talk to anyone if anything in this resonated and it's something that you want to look at more. I'd be happy to chat with any of your listeners as well.
Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate all that you're doing there and all that you're doing from a stewardship perspective and the Inspired Living book. I encourage everyone go out and get this book. It's really good. It aligns with what we talk about here on Produce on Purpose of really aligning our lives and being able to live that life that you can be able to be inspired, live in your purpose. And Scott, you continue to do those great things. Thank you for coming on, and we will see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.